Hello, friends. Good afternoon. We're happy to see you guys. Hope your summer's going well. Everybody's either back to school or they're thinking about back to school, and we know that that means it's a very hectic time for you guys as you're navigating new schedules and new classes, transitions, and um, children and families and teachers getting ready for what their new fall looks like. It's both a exciting time and it can be very hectic and stressful, and we're mindful of that and really appreciate that you guys took the time to join us for this content. Whether you are thinking about doing something with your real estate right now or in the future, we like to coach our clients to understand that strategizing their business and the business as an asset and strategizing their real estate or future real estate as an asset are two very different things. So we're going to focus today solely on the real estate, what strategies you can employ, how you can think about it. So we're going to jump into the meat of our content here. And I'm thrilled to have one of our 5 transaction advisors, Mike Pepper, join me, the most senior of the 5. And I won't say whether that means age or he's been around the longest, but both. But anyway, Mike has spent a career, even before Hinge, dedicated to this industry's real estate. As he would, I'll ask him to tell you a little bit about himself, but spoiler alert, he was a developer and owner of early education real estate before he began his work with Hinge and supporting clients with their business in real estate. So thank you for being here, Mike.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I love giving our high-level view to our clients.
Great. Thank you for that, Mike. Could you give our guest a little bit of information about your background before we jump in?
Yeah, you bet. So Kathy's right. I am a recovering developer, and I met Kathy when she was representing a client of hers who happened to be a tenant in default on some of my childcare properties that we owned and developed in Colorado. So after we finished that transaction, she asked me to join up, and that was a long time ago, folks. That was over a dozen years ago, and this is the best position to be in, and it's really a thrill to work with owners to create powerful exits, because buying and selling your real estate or buying and selling your business is not something that the client does every day, but it is something that we do every day.
Well said, Mike. Thank you for that. I will invite you guys as we go through the next 30 minutes or so. I'm going to turn the stage over to Mike. Mike will take us through some great content on how you should think about investment in real estate. Please feel free as we go to put your questions or comments in the chat or the Q&A. You'll find that over to the right-hand side of your screen on the chat bar. I'll be watching out for that, Mike. I'll let you jump into the content now, and I will see you in a bit, and we'll take some questions.
Sounds good. Okay, folks, it's a pleasure to visit with you. It's a little bit of a disembodied experience here. I'm speaking into the camera, and I can't see the audience reaction. So hopefully we'll be able to give you some nuggets of information. And as always, if you have specific particular issues on your situation, we'd love to talk to you about that confidentially and privately. But the purpose of this presentation is to give you a high-level overview, some ideas to think about. It's possible that you may have already considered some of these, but we just want to reinforce some of the issues that you need to think about as you go through the question of how to handle your real estate. In many cases, the real estate is more valuable than the business. So we want to make sure that you're paying attention to it and not just treating it as an afterthought. You'll see our agenda on the right. We have 6 topics. There's about 20 something slides. We'll go through a couple of minutes per each slide. If you have questions, let us know. If you have more in-depth questions, please contact us directly. We're going to discuss the business needs, and the personal needs should not be ignored. We'll talk a little bit about the financial analysis part, how to calculate the actual valuation of properties. We're going to discuss a high level of the benefits and burdens of leasing and owning. There's pros and cons to each. We also want to identify risk factors, because there's sometimes people get a little Pollyanna about the risks, and other times you can be overly concerned about risk. So there are ways to manage certain risks, and certain situations there's too much risk, and we want to avoid those situations. At the very end, we'll talk a little bit about lending, because part of owning property isn't just buying and selling, but perhaps you want to get a loan and keep the property. So let's move into the business needs analysis. And what we encourage our folks to do when thinking about their property, whether you are a tenant or an owner, is to let's look at these 4 boxes. And real estate, we often talk about location, location, location. So that's obviously in that first box. But directly underneath that is the space requirements. We see lots of tenants that lease older buildings. The rent is fairly cheap. It's an easy method of entry into our business, but the space may or may not work for your purposes. And so we want to make sure that when you're looking at business needs analysis, does the space work for you? Similarly, if you're the owner and your building is maybe older, one of the considerations is, will this building work for me in the long run? Secondary considerations are, how easy is it for my employees and my customers to get to my building? And many times, because of the cost of ownership, the real estate is not located on a main street. It'll be a secondary location. And that's a function of affordability. So the trade-off, of course, is going to be, how do folks find me? So thinking about whether the building matches your needs is important for location, for this interior space requirements, for accessibility. We might also include here things like visibility, traffic patterns, is it on the growth side of town? So please make sure that you're thinking about, how does your business use the property, and what are its attributes, and what are its deficiencies? When we're talking about growth opportunities, operators need to think about, how does this potential new building satisfy or not satisfy some of these basic issues. Let's move on to the next one. Layered into the business analysis is personal needs analysis. And I feel that a lot of times folks ignore this at their own peril. So let's talk about your personal resources. We talk to many operators who basically want to have business locations, multiple business locations. Their path to growth is leasing, and they don't necessarily have the resources to invest in owning their own building or multiple buildings. And that's a fine strategy. We've had lots of clients who grow by leasing. And conversely, we have plenty of tenants who have kind of a feeling in their bones that they want to own and control the property. Recognize that there's a limit to that based on your balance sheet primarily of your ability to borrow or your ability to sustain investments in property, which might crowd out your ability to grow. So that's a function of your personal resources and a little bit of what I'll call life cycle stage. So for those who are younger, there may be a preference to growing your business by leasing additional facilities and having multiple business locations and not necessarily tying up your money in bricks and mortar. And we have lots of tenants, generally lots of operators, generally I will say more mature, older operators who feel like I better own that property. I want to control it, knowing that this may put a limit on their ability to grow the number of locations because you can only borrow or invest so much in each building. With the price of a childcare building, $3, $4, $5, $7 million, that's a consideration that needs to be thought through. We also want the owners to think about what are your short-term needs and what are your long-term goals. So how do all of these match up with the business needs requirement? So please do not ignore, where are you in your life cycle? Are you at the beginning of your journey in the childcare world, or are you closer to the end? And put all these together. Consultation with HINGE will help you identify where the success points have been with other clients, and discussing these issues with your family, with your accountant, with your lawyer, with other mentors. Please make sure you're considering your personal needs as well as the business needs. Next. Okay, so a common question we get is, what's my building worth? And you would think that would be easy, but it's not, and it depends on various factors. So the main factors to determine the valuation of the business are, what is the rent and what is the capitalization rate? Sometimes the jargon is called the cap rate. And the math here is to basically determine a return on investment for the building owner. And the way we work the algebra is we say, what is the market rent? That may be what you're paying right now if you're a tenant. And we divide the rent by the yield or the cap rate. So the jargon of cap rate, capitalization rate, yield, return on investment, somewhat interchangeable. And so the rough math is, let's say you're paying, I'll take a hypothetical, you're paying $100 in rent, and we divide that number by the yield, which let's say is 8%. So 100 divided by 8 means the value of the building is $1,250. So obviously rent is more than $100 in most cases. So if your rent was $100,000 and we say that the yield is 8%, then the building is worth $1,250,000. So the rent is the numerator, the cap rate or the return on investment is the denominator. You divide that, and sometimes you can look at it, okay, there's a building for sale and the building is $1,250,000. So what would the rent be that I could afford to pay based on the yield? So those numbers are all kind of interchangeable there. Many times we have owners that come to us and they have an SBA loan, and the rent they pay themselves is limited. So we want to draw a distinction between what the market rent is versus what their SBA loan rules may be. In many cases, we see the SBA has restriction where the rent is lower than market. So this is why consultation with HINGE or another professional is important. Another way to look at the rent is sort of a check on the income approach. I realize I'm going a little quickly here. This slide discusses the valuation of property based on an income approach, which is the first and primary method. But a cross check would be, what would the replacement cost be, and what is a sales comparison? So we look at the price per foot, generally $400, $450, $350 a foot. If you're in a very high price neighborhood, land might be more expensive. The replacement cost might be $600 a foot. So we want to make sure that all of those valuation methods correlate and they're all synchronized. Again, let's talk about that individually with you on your individual circumstances. Next slide. When we talk to folks about, gee, I own some property and I own my childcare building and I'd like to sell it, what do you think the price would be and how would the process go? Part of our analysis is who is the likely buyer, not just the price. And the likely buyer, we need to do some psychological analysis to look at the types of buyers that would be interested in that property. If it's a new building and could be on the front of a brochure and it's in a high demographic area, your likely and best buyer might be one of the public REITs, REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust. And those folks love a pretty building. They want to invest in property. That's their reason for being in business. It's their job to invest so that the monthly rents could be distributed to their stockholders. These folks are eager to buy in prime top 10, top 20 markets. If your building is a little bit older and it may be in a secondary or tertiary location, that may not be the best buyer for us. The REITs, while they are professional buyers and they have plenty of money, they are also not generally the most aggressive on pricing. The ones that are most aggressive on pricing is the middle column, which is the 1031 investor. A 1031 is a shorthand jargon for a special paragraph in the IRS tax code that allows folks to sell property and defer tax until a later event. And the paragraph is actually paragraph 1031, and it's taken on a life of its own. So somebody owns a commercial building, they sold it, they've got a pot of money, they want to reinvest. They have certain time limits and restrictions on how they can invest. But these buyers are very common in the market, and they're looking to buy another commercial building and defer tax. Those buyers can be more aggressive, but the complication with them is they're typically less experienced, and they're not necessarily beholden to close on your deal because they want to identify multiple properties that could fit their requirements. So we've dealt with a lot of 1031 buyers. Once they make a commitment to buy your project, then the process can be smoother. But there is a fair amount of diligence that needs to happen ahead of time. The next category is the local investor. That's in the far column on the right. So somebody who might be in a secondary or tertiary market, the building may not be appropriate for a REIT investor, and the 1031 buyer may not appreciate the benefits of being in such a location. Oftentimes, if you're in a secondary or tertiary market, you might be the only quality childcare business in that town. Your school will always be full. You'll always be able to pay the rent. A local investor may completely understand that, and that would be your best type of buyer. The disadvantage, of course, is They don't have to invest. It's not like a REIT where they're in business to make investments. And many times that local investor recognizes that there's not other buyers, so the pricing may not be at the top end of the scale. So when we look at the universe of buyers, we need to make sure we're factoring that in when we look at the what is my building worth question, because it's not just the numbers aspect, is who is going to be the likely buyer for the property. Next slide, please. One area that we want our clients to think about if they are the owner and they're thinking about selling is looking at what happens after the sale. So I'm especially focused on bullet point number 2, to plan for the long-term impact of having a rent schedule. So when we sell a building and keep the business, now you're going to be a tenant to your real estate buyer. So that means establishing a rent schedule, probably signing up for a 10-year lease, might be 15. So we have to put our tenant hat on and look at bullet number 3 here. We have a mindset shift. So what does that mean to be a tenant? And what kind of loss of control are we willing to trade in exchange for getting a purchase price on the closing date? What would your plans be for the proceeds? Do you want to buy more locations? Are you going to be acquiring other businesses and that's why you need the money? Do you just want to take chips off the table and maybe you're willing to pay tax and put money in the bank? Or do you feel like the building is kind of reaching the end of its lifespan? Maybe you want to sell it to somebody else and you'll be a tenant for 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, you can just close the doors. So we want you to think about what happens after the sale before it even happens. And this way you can form an effective strategy. Next slide. So these are some of the same types of issues. Also remember, we can turn this around. Let's say you're the buyer of a childcare facility. Maybe there's a tenant in there that's already operating and you're just looking for a passive investment. Maybe it's an empty building that you're thinking about buying. So think about not just if you're the tenant or you're the owner of an existing building, but flip it around and put yourself in the position now of thinking, okay, there's this empty building that I could purchase. What is the cost of buying the building? What is the cost of renovating it? How will I get the money? What ongoing costs will be there going forward? And the owner user idea of occupancy costs needs to be factored in when you do an analysis of buying this empty building. Please don't deceive yourself on what the costs will be going forward. So we often see people talk about, you have the chance to buy this empty building and it's kind of cheap. Well, that may or may not be a good value. So let's consider how much will it cost to renovate. And at the beginning of your analysis, we advise you to factor in a fairly high contingency factor because there's many things you don't know. Maybe the building needs fire sprinklers and there aren't fire sprinklers in there at the moment. And so at the beginning of your analysis, you may say, okay, well, it's only going to cost me, pick a number out of thin air, $500,000 to renovate it. I would add a 25% contingency factor on at the beginning of your analysis to account for the surprises. And one thing we know about construction is there's always going to be a surprise. Code upgrades, licensing requirements, energy considerations, and the contingency factor would decline as you know more information. Don't underestimate future taxes and maintenance, right? Empty buildings sound great and maybe they're cheap on an initial cost, but the lifetime cost needs to be factored in. Next slide. Here are some philosophical and practical considerations about the benefits of leasing and owning. So here we lay out some high-level concepts of what it means to own your building. And there's obviously many benefits to owning your building. I personally am a believer in owning real estate. I think long-term, it makes a lot of sense to have well-located real estate with a business in there that can pay the rent. It gives you multiple control options when it comes time to sell. On the other hand, please don't ignore the burdens and the risks of owning property. You're stuck with it. If the neighborhood changes, if the building gets older, there's a fair amount of risk associated with buildings that don't fit your needs on a going forward basis. Next slide. So here we talk about leasing, and the opportunities and the benefits of leasing a facility generally relate to liquidity and money without the benefits of the back end value increase. So when you lease a property, it's a much lower cost of entry. You don't need millions of dollars to become a tenant. All you need is the ability to sign a lease, and maybe you have to sign a personal guarantee or a partial guarantee. But the ability to get started right away is a valuable benefit in leasing. Another benefit is flexibility and the ability to walk away at the end of a lease. Now, nobody wants to go into a lease thinking that, gee, it's not going to work out, but it is an option for you in the 10 years of the lease, that maybe by the year 10, you decide that building doesn't work, the landlord isn't fixing things, the neighborhood has changed, and that may not be the place for you. The risks are that unless you negotiate well on the rent, you may be in a position where the rent increases chew up too much of your tuition revenue. You may be in a situation where the landlord isn't abiding by the terms of the lease, and the repairs and maintenance isn't up to your satisfaction. One of the major drawbacks is the flip side of one of the major benefits is there's no residual value on your lease. And that's the flip side of the cost of entry is low. Well, the other side of the coin is, okay, it doesn't cost me any money usually to get into it beyond a security deposit. And you could be spending money on furniture and supplies and signage. And at the end of the day, you walk away with your furniture, supplies, and your sign probably stays there. So there's no right or wrong answer. We just want you to be knowledgeable and understand what the risks and rewards are for leasing and owning. Next slide. When you're contemplating the analysis of your property, let's make sure you understand the big picture here. And oftentimes when we talk to clients, their building used to be right in the center of growth and their property values were increasing. Then a new road goes in, a new subdivision goes in, a new employment center goes in on the exact opposite side of town, and property values are in decline. So look at a macro view of the property values and the economic outlook for that location. Combined with that is we want you to have a macro view for what is the demand for commercial real estate. Now, we happen to think that there will always be a demand for early childhood education. But as an example, look at what's happened to some of these office buildings in various cities around the country with the change in usage for employees. Many employees now work from home. So the amount of office workers has declined, and the valuation of office buildings in some locations has declined substantially. Is there a situation where the demand for childcare would decline? We don't think so, but let's be clear that you're thinking about how the future demand characteristics will impact your school. We see many older buildings where you have to go through a room to get to another classroom. That may not be the best type of property. The demand from customers for that type of school may decline over time. Playgrounds, we're seeing a lot of money invested in playgrounds, and customers are gravitating towards bigger, fancier playgrounds. Do you have the ability to attract such customers given the money constraint? So please look at your buildings and the future potential buildings in the eye of the customer, as well as yourself as the operator. Next slide. Here are some of the risks that some of them can be mitigated and are not that big of a deal, and some of them we can't control, and some of them become red flag. So, for example, environmental concerns. If your building was formerly a gas station site and you're thinking about buying it, we want to make sure that you have all the right kind of documentation that shows that there is no contamination that was left behind. And if there's any hint that it wasn't properly taken care of, that may be insurmountable. We have some clients that have existing schools that are located on former gas stations, and some of them do have the proper documentation, and some of them say, I didn't think about it 30 years ago when I first started here, and the gas station was demolished in the 50s. The 1950s was not a particularly strenuous time for environmental considerations. So think about how you might obtain such information. Some clients want to go through the investigation phase themselves and try to understand what the risks are for the next buyer or for their family. And everybody, hears about the industrial pollution or, fairly obvious contamination, but even a mild amount of environmental concern could be enough to make a negative impact on your overall property. So whether you're the owner of an existing building or you're thinking about expansion, please do not ignore the environmental issues or think that, oh, my lawyer will handle it. This is becoming more and more a front and center issue. Other areas that we want to make sure you're looking at the risk factors are the suitability of the building, whether you can change it. So my example of a classroom that's within a classroom, maybe that could be changed, maybe some interior renovation, you can make a hallway, or maybe it can't be changed and you have to mitigate it. How would you mitigate it? Maybe there's a different cost structure. Maybe there's a different age group that goes in there. Maybe that room is repurposed for something else. We want you to think about the political environment. This is probably the one that's least in your control, but it is a risk factor. We see some states that are trying to offer additional benefits to voters and offering transitional kindergarten or other subsidies. It sounds good. We want to make sure you understand whether or not in practicality, whether that will be good for you. And demographic changes are ones that are a little bit harder to predict, but we want to make sure that you understand where's the neighborhood going so that you can make intelligent decisions. Next slide. Okay, so a part and parcel of owning real estate is the availability of debt. And this is a very high level view of the lending environment. Many of our childcare operators utilize the SBA for lending. The main two programs that we see are classified as SBA 504 and the SBA 7A. So we've given some high-level bullet points here on who qualifies, what the potential interest rates are, and some notes on it. The 504 program is a real estate only program where the interest rate is based on the prime rate plus a margin or a spread. Based on today's rates, you'll be in the 8 to 9% range. It depends on how much of a loan you want, what your borrowing history is, the condition of the property. The success of the SBA is well known through the industry. There's many local banks that provide SBA financing. They act as a conduit between you and the government. Many of our clients say it's a great program, but it's a kind of a long process. And at the end of the day, though, you'll get a loan. So you might endure 90 days of frustration, and then you can enjoy a long-term loan. The 7A program is designed for those generally in acquisition mode, where you can buy real estate and business and 90% loan to value. So that's fairly attractive. There's a fair amount of paperwork. There's usually a big upfront fee. If you can get through that brain damage, then your interest rate's going to be fairly attractive. The SBA 7A program has a kind of a complicated structure to it. But many of our operators find success with it. And we have a lot of clients that believe that the SBA financing allows them to get loans where a conventional bank may look with unfamiliarity with the childcare industry. So the SBA is known for helping childcare operators get loans, especially first-time owners. The SBA is willing to take a chance on startups. Contrast that with the conventional lenders, which are described below, where many times those are the types of banks that will give you the money if you can prove you don't need it, which is that horrible conundrum that we see. If you have local relationships with local banks, then sometimes that's that's better than dealing with impersonal SBA. Our experience with conventional lenders is that they don't necessarily understand owner users as well as SBA. Their loan to value is not going to be 90%. It's probably more like 70 to 75%. The flip side is your local relationship may parlay into a faster approval. Perhaps there's a better structure, and you certainly can call somebody later, a year or two into it. You want to restructure, or you've got some wrinkle, you want to add a new property. Having a local banker that will answer the phone can be fairly valuable. So again, as with all of the issues that we've talked about today, there's pros and cons. We have lots of clients who have SBA financing. They're happy with the financing, unhappy with the process. The conventional lending, the money's out there. Banks want to make successful loans. Sometimes they don't understand our industry. We urge you to explore all those options as you think about maybe a loan, especially in growth mode. A loan might be the way to go. So next slide. I believe that is the end of the formal presentation. We're happy to answer specific questions.
Thank you, Mike. Fantastic information. You guys can access the slide deck from this QR code. So do that. We have about 10 minutes left. So pop your questions into the chat or the Q&A. And while you guys are doing that, Mike, as it occurred to me, a very frequent conversation I'm having with childcare owners right now that might be worth a quick mention. So some of our community has experienced softer enrollments than they would like. I had some theories about some of that, but there are, and also we're building our shift content around it. Some of the things that we're hearing, and I promise this relates to real estate. You'll see where I'm going in a minute, even though I'm talking about enrollment. So some of the theories around that are parent flexibility. Parents are more flexible and can be more flexible than ever before. Also, there's some pockets where pre-K competition is an issue. What I wanted to mention was that we equally hear that brand new construction competition is in almost every market, especially in our major markets, is difficult. So it's very difficult if you either lease or own a building in a market that others find attractive. That's good news, because that means that you have the opportunity to have a good, thriving business. Is risky because that also means that brand new construction could be coming to compete with you. So what I wanted to say about that is opportunities if you own, before I say how to do it, let me say, how we believe you should think about that. We believe that your real estate, no matter what age, should reflect the same level of quality on the outside and on the interior as was happening in your classroom. And what I mean by that is branding upgrades, the look of your school from the exterior, the lobby, the brand that you create, how your building reflects your USPs or unique selling points is critical all the time, but especially if you have brand new construction in your market. So some things to think about. If you own your property, perhaps you can leverage the equity you have in your property to fund some upgrades to your property. Cash flow, of course, is another great way to fund that. If you are a tenant and you have a landlord, I love the strategy of asking your landlord to be the investor in those upgrades of the property. Now, your landlord's probably going to come back and say, great, if you will pay me more rent based on that. And that's fair, frankly. I happen to own some childcare property, and I got a call from the tenant to say, we feel like we need to upgrade your property. We need $250,000. We'll pay you more rent based on that. I went to the bank as a landlord and said, could you increase my mortgage $250,000? They said, sure, you've got a great loan to value. I said, here's your money. And now they helped me pay that loan off with increased rent. So those are super important to stay on top of. But whether you own your property or lease your property, those are good strategies for being sure that you stay competitive and stay relevant. Okay, Mike, I'm going to jump over to the first question now. So Bob says that he has a 12,500 square foot building. The capacity is 142. If I have a year I'm looking to sell, how far in advance should I plan for a sale, a year or 2 years? So let's talk about that from the standpoint of the business and the real estate, Mike. How would you advise Bob on that?
So Bob owns the building?
Yes, it sounds like that. Let's talk about how far in advance should he prepare for a sale of his business and a sale of his real estate, or those could be two different things.
I think that starting 12 months ahead of time, it would be standard practice, because sometimes the transfer of a license can take a few months in and of itself. And you can never start too early, I think, is our maxim.
Yeah, Mike, I'm not sure if everybody else lost your last sentence like I did, but could you say your last sentence again?
Well, sorry about my bad connection. I feel that you never could start too early.
Yeah, what Mike is saying is that you can never start too early. I'll also add to that a little bit in that we like to build relationships. Bob leases, but good question, Bob. We like to, obviously we know you well and love you already, Bob, but we like to start strategizing with people like right when they start their company, because there's so many ways we can suggest that we position the business. And if you have a year, you have even better 2 years to think about it. Now, Bob, we might look at your financials and say you are rocking it. We have 0 suggestions. You're at max value for your business. Or we might say in these 2 or 3 areas, if you made these couple of tweaks, then it could significantly increase your value. So one thing to say there is that, let's say there's an average 6 multiple for a business. For every dollar we help you gain or save in your business, that's worth $6. So it can multiply really quickly, which is why it's a multiple. So as far ahead as you want, Bob. I mean, we could say you're ready to go, or we could say, hey, if you're still energetic and ready to stick it in there and do another year or 2, you could really position yourself at a higher value. But great question. Let's see if we have one more. If not, anybody want to pop it in there quick, because we're We're right at our hour. Mike, we might have to do a part two because I had a couple of thoughts for you on setting the rent, which, of course, in our world, the rent determines the value of the real estate as the cash flow. And there's certain markers that we know that our community uses when they set the rent in a property. But we're out of time. So there might be a part two for us, Mike. And if anyone else is thinking about that, that is part of our evaluation as well. Here would be the market rent that we would use in this business. And of course, that rent, which is the cash flow that it creates, then determines the value of the real estate with the business sitting in it, like Mike said. But, part two, Mike. Very good.
This crowd is ready for, the crowd is ready for real estate 201.
201. Okay, I'm up for it. I really appreciate that information, Mike. I think that it was a very good overview of how to think about and strategize a potential investment in real estate. And just to say one more time that real estate and the business sitting in it are two separate assets that can be strategized separately, can be bought separately, can be sold separately. And those are pieces of information we would love for you guys to be armed with as you are navigating running a financially healthy business. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you very much, Mike. We'll see you guys again soon for 2.1 real estate.